Good morning. I'm very happy to be back with you today after being gone for the last week and a half in Oregon. I got to be a counselor at a summer camp. Got to bring a few of the, teens with me as well, and that was a very fun experience. Very tiresome experience as well. I'm very physically exhausted. Spiritually, I'm pretty recharged. It was a very great experience, but this is a summer camp I've been going to throughout all my childhood. I've volunteered as a counselor before and haven't had a chance. I've been in Utah for over 7 years now and haven't had a chance to go back, and I've really been missing it. So I was very happy I got to go back this year and see a lot of my old friends that are now counselors too, that are helping to run the camp. And as I thought back over the years, I went from age 9 through 18. This week of summertime always was a very good week for me. It was always a spiritually refreshing experience. I always came away from camp very excited, for the Lord and for doing His work. And I was reflecting on that this week, why that is so, why this 1 week was always such a good experience for me, why it always had such a positive impact and always gave me encouragement to kind of refresh my zeal for God. And among many reasons, such as it's great to meet other Christians your age, it's great to know the folks here at church, but it's also great to know that there are a lot more Christians out there in the world than just the people in this room, and these are our closest friends, but it's great to meet others and have friends in other parts of the country, and that's definitely part of it. But I think as I'm very tired now, I realize that part of it, as a kid was always, and now as an adult being a counselor, part of it is that I don't really have any downtime at all at camp. You get up at 6 to 7, depending on how many times you hit the snooze button, based upon how many pranks were played the night before. Get some coffee and try to prepare for my Bible class. 8 o'clock counselors meeting, 8:30 breakfast, 9 o'clock morning announcements and devotional at the campfire, followed by Bible class for 45 minutes, then an hour or two of sports based upon your societies like they have at the college, and lunch and cabin time where you're with just your own people in your own cabin, and then you got afternoon activities and a couple hours of free time, and usually some big evening activity. I had to plan an entire field day, and I'm not very creative, so that put me out of my comfort zone, but I think it turned out very well, and so I've been working on that and all my little bits of free time that I had, and my point is, I'm not trying to advertise the camp. That's not what I should be doing from up here. My point is, every day, basically every moment was spoken for. Little breaks here and there for me to catch a nap or try to, prepare for one of my bigger assignments. But for the most part, my whole day was spoken for. It was already planned out for me. And I began to realize that when I had something to do, I had little time to worry about things that I shouldn't be worrying about. I had little time to be caught off guard by sin or temptation. That's why you feel so strong. And we talk about it. We feel strong on Sundays, and then we struggle throughout the week, because when you're here, you're actively doing something. When you're actively involved with something, you don't have time to be vulnerable. And so we've heard the phrase, idle hands are the devil's work. And I think that's very true. It's not a direct quote from the Bible. The phrase, we hear it, the devil finds work for idle hands, or idle hands are the devil's workshop, or any variety of that phrase. It's not a direct quote from the Bible, but I think it's certainly a biblically accurate statement or truth. In Romans chapter 13 and verse 14, Paul instructs us to make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. And I think that idleness, sitting around with nothing to do, I think that is one of those ways where we make a provision for the flesh, where we leave ourselves more vulnerable to temptation and sin than we would if we were occupied in something useful. Now it says, make no provision for the flesh. I like to think of that as don't give an advantage to the enemy. Now at summer camp, we do camper counselor games where we play against the campers, and we beat them in every sport this year, not to brag, but in basketball, it was a little close at first, but then we decimated the seniors, who are 13 to 18 years old, and so we let the little kids, those who are 9 to 12, we let them come in and play against the counselors, and of course, we beat the older kids, so we decided to play them left-handed. And that's the idea here. You ever heard that phrase, I could beat you with one hand tied behind my back, That's what you do when you make yourself vulnerable to sin. That's making provision for the flesh. You are putting yourself at a disadvantage in the fight. And so when you don't have worthwhile tasks, when you don't have worthwhile endeavors to occupy your time, you are making yourself vulnerable. You're putting yourself at a disadvantage. And idleness is one of those great ways where we can really give an advantage to the enemy. I like this quote from Thomas Jefferson, determined never to be idle. It is wonderful how much may be done if we are always doing. And that's what I'd like for you to consider this morning, is the many warnings in the Bible about the dangers of idleness, and maybe give you a few suggestions on how we can overcome those obstacles so that we're not putting ourselves at a disadvantage against the enemy. We're not making provision for Satan to give him a heads up, to give him an advantage in this struggle. So firstly, there are many warnings in the Bible. And I'll just say this at the outset. Idleness, just so you're not misunderstanding me, when I talk about being idle, I mean more the idea of laziness. Not so much rest. Rest after work is really a good thing, actually. When you've put in your work, when you've put in your time and effort towards a project, that's one of life's greatest and simplest pleasures and joys, is just to, relax and rest after working. And the Bible tells us that. In Exodus chapter 20, God commanded a day of rest. In Exodus chapter 20, we notice in verse 8, Exodus chapter 20 and verse 8, the command for the Sabbath observance. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. I think God intended that to be a day of reflection upon him, so it did have a somewhat spiritual purpose in many ways, but also it's the principle that you work 6 days and, it's okay to have a day of rest, assuming you've done your days of work, that you've not been idle the days before. So rest is not a bad thing. And if you look in Mark chapter 6, and I've mentioned this before about the Gospel of Mark, that there's one word that I summarize this gospel with, and that's the word immediately. That word is all throughout the Gospel of Mark. Immediately Jesus did this, and when he was finished, he immediately got up and went to Cana, and he immediately, and so this emphasizes that though Jesus was only active for just a couple of years, his ministry was only a few years, it was very intensive. He was very active. And so it's no wonder that in Mark chapter 6 and verse 31, that Jesus said to his apostles as he gathered them, they come back from their journeys, and it says in verse 30, they reported to him all that they had done and taught. And so in verse 31, he says to them, come away by yourselves to a lonely place and rest a while, for there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. Jesus says, you guys have earned a little break. Go find a quiet, secluded place and just rest for a while. So rest is a good thing. And after all, even God rested in Genesis chapter 2, verse 2, after a busy busy week of creative output. So rest is okay. It's okay if you have I've heard many people suggest that nap times can be very productive if they're not too long. So rest after you've worked. That's the key. After you've worked, you've earned a little bit of rest. That's okay. That's not what I'm talking about here. That's not what the Bible warns us about. So what we're talking about is not just rest, but more the idea that when things that need to be done, when work is being neglected, idleness is a bad thing. And we're given many warnings about it. Go to the book of Proverbs. Book of Proverbs. Spent a lot of time with my kids this week at camp looking at Proverbs, such practical, simple kernels of truth. In Proverbs chapter 18, if you notice in verse 9, idleness usually stems from not having a specific goal or purpose in mind. When you aren't actively trying to accomplish something, that's usually where idleness or laziness comes into play. And the book of Proverbs tells us that sloppy or careless work is akin to malicious destruction. They're very similar. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 9, he also who is slack in his work is brother to him who destroys. Now, the one who destroys, you would assume that means a malicious intent. But it says, when bad things happen because of laziness, well, it's not really that much different than someone who has a malicious intent. Think about it this way. Carnival workers, people who set up the little county fairs, put together those rides, and those, by the way, are the scariest rides you'll ever be on. They might not go upside down and be giant monstrous things you'll see at Six Flags, but they're scary in a whole different kind of way. I hope that the people who put those things together, because they put them together, take them down, move them to the next state all throughout the year. I hope the people that put them together pay attention to what they're doing. Because, and they probably know that they have to pay attention, because if somebody gets hurt because the ride falls apart or malfunctions because they didn't do their job, they didn't go through the safety checklist, they didn't check all the fluids and the hydraulics and all those things, they didn't check all the harnesses, and if they aren't doing their job, if they're slack about it, they know that they are going to take the blame for it and be in real trouble. The point is, idleness is harmful to others. You might not intend for bad things to happen, but when you're sloppy or lazy or slack in your work, when you are idle, when you are not doing the things you're supposed to be doing, bad things are a result. Go to the next chapter. Chapter 19 and verse 15. Laziness casts into a deep sleep, and an idle man will suffer hunger. This seems like such a self-evident truth that hardly needs to be spoken, but there are so many people in this world today that they're not interested in working hard, but they can't understand why they aren't taken care of. People just don't get this principle that in order to provide for yourself and your family, that means sometimes you got to work. That means sometimes you got to do a job because it's the one available, even if you don't like it, even if it's not your calling in life. Sometimes you've just got to do what you've got to do to provide for your family and for yourself. Because the man who is idle, he comes into poverty. And so in the Old Testament, there are plenty of warnings about idleness, and of course in the New Testament as well. It oftentimes leads to sin, and here's the real danger. Like I said in the introduction, it's about making provision or giving an advantage to the enemy. And so when we're sitting around with nothing on our plate, with nothing to do, we're a sitting target. We got a target on our chest. And the Bible talks about Satan with his flaming darts or flaming arrows. Why do you think God uses that illustration? Because so often we make ourselves targets, vulnerable, saying, shoot me, I'm right here. We're not even making it a challenge. So when we sit around idly, doing nothing productive, we are vulnerable. Go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. And this is the point that Paul makes in a couple of places, that oftentimes, and again, this is the real warning or danger with being idle, having nothing productive to do, is that it often leads you to sin. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 11, for we hear that some among you are leading an undisciplined, or it says in other translations, some among you walk in idleness, doing no work at all, but acting like busybodies. That when you don't have enough work to occupy yourself, you start meddling in other people's business. That's what it means to be a busybody. You have to be involved in everybody's business and all their affairs, and you overstep your bounds. And so, again, it leads to bad things. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, Paul is talking about how the church has a responsibility to take care of its widows. However, there is a rule that supersedes that. Family has a responsibility first. And so family should take care of its own. But also, Paul does put further restriction on how a church can support and take care of widows. He says, you shouldn't support younger widows. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, he gives reason here. Verse 11, 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 11, but refuse to put younger widows on the list. That is, those who we would support, I think, even financially. For when they feel sensual desires in disregard of Christ, they want to get married, thus incurring condemnation because they have set aside their previous pledge. And at the same time, now here's where he talks about idleness, they also learn to be idle as they go around from house to house, and not merely idle, but also gossips and busybodies, talking about things not proper to mention. And he gives them instruction. He says in verse 14, therefore I want younger widows to get married, bear children, keep house, give the enemy no occasion for reproach. They should be occupied with useful tasks. Things that are useful or worthwhile. But he says when a woman who is young enough to be married, but basically has, all the financial support she needs without being married and has no family to take care of or children, it puts her in a position where she turns to things like gossip. Because again, idleness, having nothing productive to do, leads you to sin because you are vulnerable to temptation. And that's why Paul says, you need to do something useful. Got ahead of myself there. Their lack of activity was leading them to sin, and so that's why Paul advises them to occupy their time, to keep busy with a home life, marrying, having children, keeping house, etc., things that are worthwhile, rather than just having nothing better to do but gossip and talk about things they shouldn't talk about. We live in a sinful world, and a person who doesn't have something useful to do, something particular to work on, invariably will be tempted to do something sinful. If we have nothing to do, the devil is all too eager to give us some suggestions. I'd like to suggest to you 2 areas in particular to be particularly watchful: television and the computer. Idleness makes you vulnerable to temptation and leads you to sin. Be very careful. When you're flipping through the TV, when you have no purpose, you're just looking for a distraction, you're almost guaranteed to find something you shouldn't be watching. And if you got nothing better to do, you might stop on a channel that you shouldn't stop on. When you're on the computer, and I think Satan has somehow gained control over YouTube, that it automatically loads a video for you next. So if you're not paying attention, some video loads up next, you have no idea what it's going to be. And sometimes, have you ever got caught in that trap where you watch something on YouTube, it's funny, and the next thing comes up, and it's funny, but it's a little bit not as clean a humor as the one you just watched, and you just kind of get pulled into this trap where, the next video keeps coming up, and it's worse and worse than the one before it. You just start looking around on the computer, you're bored, you have nothing better to do, and you're going to run into trouble. You're asking for trouble when you do these things. When you get on the television or on the computer without any real purpose in mind, without anything really to otherwise occupy you that is useful. I'm not saying that the television or computer are entirely purely evil. I'm just saying, be on guard. Don't just get on there with an aimless purpose to just be distracted, because you are going to find problem. Whether it's negative images or, images of a sexual content that, will tempt you, whether it's hateful language or propaganda, things that will, you buy into all the stuff, all the hate speech or all the stuff about being afraid of this, that, or whatever. You start listening to that. And what was it in 1 Timothy chapter 5? Paul specifically highlighted one sin in particular that stems from idleness. Now, I think idleness can lead to any number of sins, but Paul emphasizes one in both of those texts, particularly 1 Timothy 5. That's gossip. When you get on the computer with no purpose in mind, when you got nothing else you should be doing, and you start spending more time on the computer than you thought you should, gossip is another one of those things that can happen. You become a busybody. You become so involved with who's doing what on Facebook, and you start wanting to know, who's doing this or that, or who's involved with what, or who's in what relationship. And so gossip is just one of those natural things that stems from idleness. And one of my favorite phrases is clickbait. That annoys me so much. You see that on Facebook, and what I'm talking about is something that baits you. It offers you something, but, tempts you or allures you with something, but really offers you very little. Usually it's got a title that says, "You won't believe ... What? Or the latest news about so-and-so that you won't believe is trying to get you to click on there. Don't be a fish that bites the bait. Don't just be pulled around with whatever looks interesting at the moment. Live your life with a purpose. Don't just idly coast through life, going with the current and biting whatever bait is in front of you. Live your life with a purpose. So just be careful when it comes to things like computer and television. I do have a series of lessons coming up very, very soon on the family. But I would like to mention briefly about the role of parents in making sure your kids don't have idle hands. Parents are instructed directly from God. This is God's instruction. If you have children, this is God's instructions directly to you, that you train your children to behave properly. Proverbs 22 talks about training up a child in the way he should go, and if you do that, when he is older, he will not depart from that way. And Ephesians 6:4 talks about nurture and instruction and admonition of the Lord, that we instruct our children. It is our job to correct bad behavior and train them up to behave properly. That is our job. But I see a lot of parents today that are hands-off when it comes to raising their children. They take a very hands-off approach. They let their children decide things. They let their children dictate which course they will go on. There's kind of a movement in homeschooling that, we let our children decide the curriculum, that whatever interest, if they see a butterfly, then we go study butterflies, or, we just kind of, whatever they like that day is what we study in school. And so we let them decide what they need to learn. And parents let their children decide about dress and fashion. That's not really appropriate for a boy, but he wants to wear it, so okay, I don't want to crush his spirit. I want him to feel creative, and that's fine. We'll let him choose that stuff. He doesn't like the foods he should eat. Well, I don't want to push him. I want him to be happy, so we'll let him eat whatever he wants. And it's even getting to some really just unbelievable things. I'm not going to impose one gender or another on my child. You don't get that as much out here, but on the West Coast where I'm from, you hear stories like that in the news more often than you'd expect, about parents raising their children gender neutral. We'll let them make those decisions. And so parents are being very hands-off, allowing their children, but you know what? Children left to their own devices make horrible choices. Is that really a surprise? But that's the truth, and that's in the Bible. Children left to their own decisions make bad decisions. In Proverbs chapter 22, I want you to notice verse 15. Proverbs chapter 22 in verse 15. Children need to be taught good behavior. Children need to be taught good habits. Proverbs 22 and verse 15. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. Now, this isn't saying you spank your child till they can't sit down no more. It's not saying that every time they do the slightest thing wrong, or they provoke you, you take off your belt and whip them across the back. That's not what it's saying, but it is saying that children aren't born inherently wise. Children don't have a clue. They need to be taught the most basic things in life. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. And that's nothing negative. That's just the way we are when we come into this world. We don't know better, and we need to be taught better. We're not just going to stumble upon it on our own. So parents, it is your job to train good behavior. It is our God-given responsibility to direct their steps. And so when it comes to letting your children have idle time where they have no responsibility, where they can do whatever comes to them, well, they're going to find trouble. Satan will say, I've got plenty for you to do. We need to be involved even in this part of our children's life. Now, I understand we cannot schedule and control every moment of their waking lives. But we had better have some presence in their life as far as dictating how their time is spent. Pray over it. Think about it. I know you're busy. These are your children, and it is your job, your responsibility from God to direct their steps. Give them things to do. Occupy their time. Or else Satan will. That's what the Bible tells us. Parents are worried about robbing their children of their childhood by giving them too many chores or responsibilities or getting after them for things. I don't want to rob them of their childhood. You should worry less about that and worry more about robbing them of the training they need to be a functioning adult. Find worthy tasks to occupy your children's time, or they're going to be easy targets. They're going to be sitting ducks. Again, I know you can't control or dictate every moment of their lives from when they wake up to when they go to sleep at night, but you got to try and put some structure in their schedules. You got to try and find some things that are worthwhile to teach them. And this starts with God. God has to be at the center of your life, and you want to make it the center of their life as best you can. So worthy ways to spend your time, some of them are pretty, obvious if you read the Bible. Pray with your children. Read the Bible with your children. I'm not talking, you don't have to do 6 hours a day to the point where they hate reading the Bible, but read with them. Spend some time reading the Bible with them. Talk to them. Involve them in the things you do. If you're going to visit people at church, any work you do that is kingdom work, if you understand that phrase, have your children come with you. So find ways for them to spend their time that are worthy in a spiritual sense and beyond that. And beyond that, in addition to things like praying and reading the Bible with them and teaching them and getting them involved in your spiritual work, there's any number of things you can do. My point is, just keep them from sitting around on the computer, on their phones, where trouble will find them. Teach them basic life skills to clean their rooms or cook food, how to balance a budget, how to sew, get them doing yard work. I hated it, but my parents, had me out in the yard every Saturday for at least an hour, and, I know how to take care of a yard and, house repairs. Have them do that with you, stuff they'll need when they're older. Teach them how to change a tire. Things that are just useful life skills. Start with emphasize and prioritize the spiritually important things, but also just keep your kids doing things that are worthwhile. That's what I'm trying to get across to you. My neighbors, they got a bunch of grandkids, and one day they brought over a little plate of sugar cookies that were frosted for Jessica and I, and I thought that was a great idea. They're getting their kids involved, spending time making the cookies and going to their neighbors, and just find things like that to occupy your kids' time with useful things. Otherwise, trouble will find them. And that's really the point as we wrap up the lesson. The solution to all the warnings and dangers about idleness is that you fill your time with worthwhile things. Prioritize spiritual things like prayer, Bible study, meditation, acts of service towards your brethren and towards your neighbor. But otherwise, if you've got hours throughout the day, multiple hours, where you've got nothing to do, Satan will find something for you to do. You can rest after you've worked, but avoid distraction, avoid time wasters. If you go back to 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, Paul serves as a good example. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. The solution to idleness is get busy working. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 7. For you yourselves know how you ought to follow our example, because we did not act in an undisciplined manner among you, or we did not act with idleness. Nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it. But with labor and hardship, we kept working night and day so that we might not be a burden to any one of you. That was Paul's mentality. Paul didn't have time for distractions. Paul didn't have time to waste. Idleness was not a part of Paul's lifestyle, and we can't afford to entertain idleness in our lives either. Idle hands are certainly the devil's workshop. Jesus knew that he needed to be about his Father's work. That's Luke chapter 2 and verse 49. As a young boy, when his parents lost him, they found him in the temple, and he said, didn't you know I needed to be about my Father's work, about my Father's business? Jesus, as a young boy, knew that. In Luke chapter 10 and verse 2, here's the thought I'll leave you with before we sing the invitation song. Luke chapter 10 and verse 2. Like I said, I'll be the first guy to admit I watch my share of TV. But I did get rid of cable. There's no channel surfing for me. I watch movies. I still probably spend a little too much time. But I'll be the first to admit, sometimes that's a great way to just relax. But that comes after work. And when you start looking, when you don't know what you want to watch, and you start flipping, when you don't know what you're looking for on the internet, just find something better to do, because trouble will find you. The Lord needs workers. Luke chapter 10 and verse 2. Jesus said there is no shortage of work to be done in his kingdom. So if we have hours of free time in a day, if we have hours to spend on video games, on social networking on the computer, on watching TV, if we have hours to dedicate to that, we're blind to all the work around us that needs to be done. Luke chapter 10, verse 2, he was saying to them, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. There is no shortage of work. There is no shortage of useful ways for you to redeem your time in this world. Don't waste your days. Don't waste your time, because we are going to give an account for that. Are you busy? Does your life feel chaotic? Do you have lots of kids trying to balance different schedules and things related to the church and what we do here with group meetings and Bible studies? And, does your life feel chaotic? Do you sometimes just wish you had a little bit of a reprieve from the chaos and the constant going? We've all wished that at times, but also recognize that maybe the chaos, the busyness, as long as it's centered on God, that might keep you from trouble. Let's avoid idleness. There's work to be done. God needs workers, not people sitting around idly. Beseech the Lord that he would send out the workers. There's work to be done. We need you. God needs you. So I want to invite you at this time to consider the work you are doing for the Lord. Are you doing enough? That's for you to decide. Are you wasting your days? Are you making yourself vulnerable to sin by sitting around with nothing to do, not thinking about how you're going to spend your time? Maybe tonight, write down a couple of goals for tomorrow so that you wake up with a purpose. God can redeem us from all our sins, even wasting time, precious time that he's given us. So as we sing the invitation song, I want to just offer that. If you've not been spending your time wisely, if you need to redeem your time and commit yourself to God, you need prayers or encouragement, we're here to help. Please come forward now as we stand and sing.